Hey there. Thanks a lot for joining me today. I see a couple of you on board, and I really appreciate you being here. Today I wanted to talk a little bit. Let me actually get off of this screen here back to Cubase. I wanted to talk a little bit about how Cubase score editor interprets sort of maybe instruments that aren't that familiar, right? So I was working on a project recently, and let me bring up this instrument types project that used a Middle Eastern library. So there was a bunch of instruments in there that were not part of the default catalog of instruments in Cubase. Things like a zurna, which is a woodwind instrument from the Middle East. There were drums, percussion, things like that. And when I had them in Dorico, of course, they were recognized because Dorico's library of instruments that it's willing to give a staff to are much more broad than Cubase. So I wanted to talk about this because I think that it, again, represents one of those important barriers that we all want to get over in terms of using the integration between Dorico and Cubase more, so we could use the Cubase score editor, at least feel like we know its limitations. I think we all know that Dorico has enormous strengths when it comes to notation. It's not so much about replacing Dorico as much as knowing where those safe zones are where we can actually use the score editor in Cubase, right? So in this project here, I've just basically imported this little zurna clip, and I'm going to go ahead, just because I am picky about these things, going to go to bar 1. And if I go ahead and select that and I open up my score editor, you see that I get nothing. So it can be confusing to somebody like me, but certainly anybody out there who hasn't yet solved this problem. Is there something wrong with my score editor? No. Is there something wrong with Cubase? No. But nonetheless, I can't see it in the score editor. I can't work with it. Not in this window, and also not in this window down here. If I were to go to score editor down here, it's all blank. So what gives, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just put both of these windows up next to each other so you can see them both. The deal here is that Cubase simply doesn't know what a zurna is, right? That's what this instrument is called, a zurna. It's a woodwind instrument that's familiar to Middle Eastern music. So the way that we can solve this essentially is using layout settings. In your big score editor window, you can go to settings right here, click on layout settings, and there's an instrument tab. And when this instrument type is empty, that's why the score editor is not showing anything. It doesn't know what it is. Now, you may not be able to find a zurna, right? Let's look at what's in here. If I do a search for zurna, there's not one there. But what I can do is I can know that for all intents and purposes, you know, notating this in a Western style, it's going to be most in common with a flute. So I can choose a flute. And lo and behold, now that I've set that instrument type, you can see that in my score editor, I'm going to zoom out a little bit just to make that a little less crazy. You can see now that I have that saved. Now, on to the next caveat, which is parts versus tracks. The MIDI part up here, right in my window, this MIDI part, this is actually where Cubase stores the identity of the instrument. It's not stored at the track level, and this is really counterintuitive. Last week when we were talking about dynamics, I also talked about how dynamics information, mezzo, forte, piano, that sort of stuff, is actually stored on a MIDI part level, not a MIDI track level. So it's a little tricky. Where this comes into being a little bit confusing is that, let's say you had a melody in a French horn or a flute, let's take for this example to stay consistent, and you wanted it to play in a zurna instead, and you drag that down to a zurna track. The fact that you've dragged it to a zurna track, even a zurna track with other MIDI parts on it that are already coming up in your score editor as a zurna, you'll find that that new part registers as a flute, and that can be really weird because that part has its instrument type identity kind of wrapped up into it. So what you want to do basically is you want to, if you ever have to do that and you have multiple parts, let's say you have something like this, what you want to do is glue those together with your glue tool, which is this little tool here, or you hit the number 4 and then you tap and it glues it into one. And as long as the first part in your gluing was a zurna, then the whole part will be a Zerna, right? So let's say that you have to change this staff label, because this is also kind of an aspect that sometimes important to realize. You can go into the instrument tab here and you can change what this says, right? So I could change the short name, long name. I'll just you know, make that Zerna A just to prove my point. And you can see that's what we get. And we get the short abbreviated version there. So this layout settings is the key to making sure that things display not just what the labels are and all that sort of thing, but if there's no instrument type established, it won't display anything, which is kind of crazy. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is how can you solve this problem forever? Like, now that I've assigned a Zerna to a flute staff or a sort of a flute instrument type, how can I be rest assured that in the future, when I load up another Zerna, that it's going to work correctly? Well, the simplest way to do that is to save it as a track preset, right? So I'm sorry that I have not had my window properly presented here. So let me switch to my desktop. I hope that I didn't mess up what I was displaying to you guys in the instrument tab by having that in a small window. Sometimes I make that mistake, so I'm sorry about that if I did that. But anyway, here's the window in case I forgot to have the zoomed in desktop view when I was making this demo. Silly me, I make mistakes sometimes. Anyway, that's where it is, this little settings button right there. But the final thing was making a track preset. So in Cubase, you can right click and you can say save track preset. And then I could save this as a Zerna. Okay, and one of the things that that's likely to do is make it so that in the future, when I load up an instrument, I can have this correct instrument type set up. Now, this worked for me in testing. It is a little bit at odds with the other investigations I did that seem to suggest that instrument identity was tied with MIDI part. But, you know, at this point, I have had my head scrambled a little bit by some of the inconsistencies about how the score editor and the key editor and Dorico are all working and interacting. And so I'm bringing you the best information I have currently. And with each problem, I try not to only explain what causes it and how to solve it, but also how to maybe create a long-term solution. And this is, for me, been the long-term solution. So if you have any insights on this, I would love to hear from you in the comments. I appreciate everybody who came out to join me today. It's great to see you guys again. I think that's Rich. I haven't seen Rich in a little while, but nice to see you. Peter, too. You haven't been available for a while, but I completely understand. My summer's been crazy. I have had very many interruptions to my schedule, but things are getting a bit more on an even keel as we head into the fall. And I don't know if anybody's going to the PMC out in LA this year, but if anybody who watches this channel is going out to the PMC, throw something in the comments, let me know, message me, because I will be there and I'd love to meet anybody who wants to meet up, say hi. Other than that, my fall should be kind of back to normal. So that's it for today's live stream. If you're new to the channel, like and subscribe. The video really helps me surface this material to more people. And I'm very encouraged that I have people following my channel and that I seem to be getting a lot of good feedback on the quality of the lessons that I'm offering. But I would love to get them out to more people. So everybody's assistance with that is greatly appreciated. And I will be back on Thursday. I hope everybody has a great week, had a nice holiday weekend, and I will see